I apologize. As you will have seen, we issued a statement earlier today on the attack in Manchester, in which the Secretary General strongly condemned the horrific terrorist attack in Manchester that occurred last night. He expresses his profound sympathy and solidarity with the people and the government of the United Kingdom. The Secretary General conveys his condolences to the families and friends of those killed and wishes the injured an early and full recovery. The Secretary General hopes that those who are responsible for this despicable attack will be swiftly found and brought to justice. Earlier today, the Secretary General was in touch and spoke to the UK Permanent Representative, Matthew Rycroft, and he will also be writing to the Prime Minister, Theresa May, and the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, to express his condolences. And for its part, the Security Council honored the victims this morning by having a moment of silence. And today marks the first anniversary of the World Humanitarian Summit that took place in Istanbul. On that occasion, the Secretary General said that the call to action set out in the Agenda for Humanity remains as urgent as ever. Preventing human suffering is my top priority as Secretary General, he said, stressing the need to redouble our efforts to reach those left farthest behind, refugees, internally displaced people, women and girls, children, and all people whose lives have been overturned by conflict and disaster. The Secretary General noted that the humanitarian assistance alone cannot sustainably reduce the need of over 130 million of the world's most vulnerable people. We must engage our collective strengths and mobilize new partnerships. The World Humanitarian Summit was one step towards our joint endeavor to reduce human suffering. It is critical that we maintain this momentum to advance the agenda for humanity and deliver better results for people in the coming years. His full statement is available online and has been shared with you. Tomorrow morning, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, will depart New York for Cancun, Mexico, where she'll participate in the 5th Global Platform on Disaster Risk Reduction. That is the first such meeting since the adoption of the Sendai Framework and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The Deputy Secretary General will deliver a speech at the opening session and moderate a Leaders Forum roundtable with heads of state and government, as well as ministers and high-level stakeholders. The global platform will be an opportunity to take stock of progress towards the implementation of the 7 Sendai global targets and the outcome that will contribute to the deliberations of the General Assembly in ECOSOC through the high-level political forum on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. The DSG will also hold bilateral meetings and participate in an event highlighting women's leadership in disaster risk reduction. And she'll return back to New York on the 25th. And this afternoon at 5:30, the Secretary General will meet with disability rights activist Andrea Stella, whose Wheels on Waves initiative is raising awareness on the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Mr. Stella is taking a copy of the convention from New York to the Vatican on a specially adapted catamaran to promote the rights of people with disabilities and the removal of physical and attitudinal barriers towards them. And from Mali, as you will have seen, 2 peacekeepers from the UN mission in the country have been killed this morning in an ambush 5 kilometers from Aguelak in the Kidal region. Another peacekeeper was wounded in the attack. The head of the UN mission, Mohamed Salah Anadif, stressed that the current wave of indiscriminate attacks against civilians, Malian forces and international forces over the past few weeks aims to undermine the efforts of the peace and stability of Mali. The Secretary General extends his condolences to the families of the fallen peacekeepers. And this afternoon, he is scheduled to address a high-level political session of the UN mission's Force Generation Conference. And that will be this afternoon, I think, at 3 o'clock. And in the next hour or so, we expect Singapore's permanent representative to hand over to the UN a software application to help us better create and maintain reports of casualties of blue helmets in peace operations. The Undersecretaries General for Peacekeeping Operations and Field Support will receive the software on behalf of the UN, and expected, obviously thanking the government of Singapore for its support and contribution. We'll have more information a bit later. And staying on the subject of peacekeepers, just a reminder that tomorrow, May 24th, we will have several events at UN headquarters to mark the International Day of UN Peacekeepers, which will be officially observed on 29th of May around the world. At 9:30, the Secretary General will preside over a wreath-laying ceremony at the Peacekeepers Memorial Site on the North Lawn. And at 10 a.m. in ECOSOC, the Secretary General will preside over the Dag Hammarskjöld Medal Ceremony, in which the 117 military, police, and civilian peacekeepers who lost their lives last year will be honored. And at 12, in this very room, the Undersecretary General for Peacekeeping Operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, and the Undersecretary General for Field Support, Atul Khare, will be joined by the Canadian Minister of National Defense, Harjit Singh Sajjan, as guests at the briefing. And all of this, obviously, you will be free to cover and follow on the web TV as well. And yesterday, from Syria, an interagency humanitarian convoy delivered much-needed assistance to the hard-to-reach areas of Jirud, Nasriya, and Atna in rural Damascus. A total of 44,250 people in need were provided with food and non-food items, including nutrition, education, water and sanitation, and hygiene assistance. This was the first joint mission to deliver humanitarian assistance to Nasriya and Atna. The last interagency convoy to Jirud was on June 23rd of 2016. The UN continues to call for safe, unimpeded, and sustained access to all people in need across the country, particularly for the more than 4.5 million men, women, and children who live in hard-to-reach or besieged areas. And I also want to flag that the Secretary General's report on the new approach to cholera in Haiti is out as an official document. It provides updated information on the incidence of suspected cholera cases in Haiti and on the further development on the implementation of the new approach. The Secretary General in the report urges member states to provide their full support to the new approach, including material assistance. He's decided to appoint a high-level envoy to develop a comprehensive fundraising strategy to seek additional voluntary contributions from member states and other sources. He also requests the General Assembly to consider inviting individual member states to consider voluntarily waiving the return of the 2015-16 unencumbered balances and credits from miscellaneous income from MINUSTA and instead direct them to the UN Haiti Cholera Response Trust Fund. And today, the Global Compact for Migration will continue its second thematic session here in New York under the theme Addressing Drivers of Migration. In her opening remarks, the Special Representative for International Migration, Louise Arbour, reminded participants of the importance of understanding why people move and the circumstances in which they move. We must remember our mandate, which is to facilitate safe, orderly, and regular migration and not to discourage mobility altogether. It's the second of 6 sessions which will gather recommendations and inform the development of the Global Compact for Migration. The next meeting will take place June 19th and 20th in Geneva. And today is the International Day to End Obstetric Fistula, with this year's theme being Hope, Healing, and Dignity for All. The day seeks to raise awareness of the need for affordable health care and for women to treat this condition, which is entirely preventable. In his message, the head of UNFPA said the theme is a call to realize the fundamental rights of all women and girls everywhere, with special focus on those most left behind, excluded, and shunned by society. An estimated 2 million women, mostly from developing countries, are living with this injury. Many endure depression and deepening poverty because they cannot afford to obtain treatment. And you will have seen today that Roger Moore passed away. UNICEF's Executive Director, Anthony Lake, said the world has lost one of its greatest champions for children, and the entire UNICEF family has lost a great friend. In his most profound roles as an actor, Sir Roger was the epitome of cool sophistication, but in his work as UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, he was a passionate and highly persuasive advocate for children. Full statement is online. And a senior personnel appointment to announce. Secretary General is appointing David McClellan-Carr of Australia as his new Deputy Special Representative in Guinea-Bissau. He succeeds Maria Dovalo Ribeiro of Ireland, who completed her assignment in January. The Secretary General is grateful for her contribution to the UN peacebuilding efforts in Guinea-Bissau. Mr. McClellan-Carr will also serve as UN Resident Coordinator and UNDP Resident Representative, and he brings with him 21 years of experience working for the UN. And our colleagues at UNEP, the UN Environment Program, today launched a partnership with Formula E, the world's first fully electric single-seater racing series to improve air quality in cities. The partnership will focus on educating consumers about the benefits of buying electric vehicles and leverage the popularity of Formula E Championship to reach younger generations and motorsports fans globally. UNEP stresses that with 6.5 million people dying prematurely each year from air pollution-related diseases, bringing attention to the need for clean air in cities is crucial for people's well-being. And if you're interested in auto racing, the Formula E Championship will be right here in, well, not right here in New York City, in fact in Brooklyn from the 15th to 16th of July. And yesterday, I think, Matthew, you asked me about the report on Garowe in Somalia, which was the Board of Inquiry. I can tell you that the Board of Inquiry dealing with that matter was completed and shared with UNICEF and the UN mission in Somalia and all other relevant partners, and they've acted on the recommendations made in the report. At 12:30 here will be a press conference on the adoption of the intergovernmentally agreed conclusions and recommendations of the 2017 Economic and Social Council Forum on Financing for Development's follow-up. Speakers will include the president of ECOSOC, Frederick Musiwa Makamure Shava. And Halas. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Stéphane. Stéphane, probably you heard about the attack today against Sheikh Salman's home in Manama, Bahrain, where one people was killed and many injured. Also, the arrest of all the people inside the house. He's a senior cleric, of course, in the region.
No, I know he is, yeah.
Do you have any?
I know he is. I have not. It's the first I've heard of it. I'm sure I have some colleagues working on it. As soon as I get you some language, I will share it with you. Evelyn?
The SG's report on Haiti, is that going to be online or?
It's a public document.
Where do we find it?
At the documents counter where documents are birthed.
Oh, I see.
Marie.
Stéphane, can you update us about the UN Board of Inquiry regarding the death of the two UN experts in Kasai? The investigation was supposed to start on May 1st. Apparently, it hasn't started. Can you
my understanding is that the work has started. And it is scheduled to be completed by the end of July. It's important for us to do this Board of Inquiry as methodically as possible.
But do you have your investigators in GRC already?
I don't know where their exact location is, but I know they have started. They've started the work. Matthew and then Michelle.
Sure. So on the same topic, I just wanted to. I'm sure you've seen the editorial in the New York Times. Very saying, quote, on the, quote, astoundingly irresponsible approach by the United Nations to an obviously dangerous and hugely important task. They also question what's been accomplished for the billions spent in the DRC. But given that it's an editorial and it's a major newspaper, what's your response to their evaluation of the UN success?
It's a little, I would say it's a little disappointing. First of all, as soon as we heard of the disappearance of our colleagues, the mission put in place quite a large number of assets to track them down, and I think that was done very quickly. As you know, the UN doesn't have the authority to launch a criminal investigation. We obviously would work closely and put one in effect should the Security Council take the decision to launch an investigation to the killings of two experts who were working for Security Council sanctions committee. I think we've seen that the Congolese authorities have completed said they've completed their investigation. We have not been fully briefed on it. Obviously, I think that seemed to have been done with quite a bit of rapidity. But we do hope to be briefed on it. And second, I would add that the contractual basis under which these experts operate is one that is put in place by the General Assembly on consultants, and that the staff member were fully briefed on security protocols.
I guess I have two, because they say like training and equipment, and also the underlying article says that no health insurance, for example. Is this something that Antonio Guterres in seeing what happened to these two people may propose?
The protocol, as far as our understanding, for death and injury for what happened are the same for staff and consultants. That's my understanding. In terms of health insurance, following the rules put in place by the General Assembly, consultants across the board carry their own health insurance, and they're not covered by the United Nations.
Does the Secretary General see any need for reforms that you can
I think there is always a need to see how we can improve the safety and security of our staff. Michelle.
Thanks, Steph. I have a follow-up on this issue and then a question on another topic. Does the UN have confidence in the Congolese government to carry out this criminal investigation?
Look, as I just said, I think we're a little taken aback at the rapidity at which it was done. I think these things need to be investigated thoroughly, and we has still, as far as I'm aware, not been briefed on the content of the investigation.
Could the Secretary General call on the Security Council to establish a?
I think there will be. I think we have to wait to see what the Security Council decides. Obviously, it is up to the Council to give us a mandate, and we would obviously implement that mandate with zeal to try to find out what happened to our two colleagues, and especially in the atrocious way they seem to have been killed.
But could the Secretary General request?
I think I'll leave it at that for the time being.
And just on, I asked you a little while ago about the treatment of gay people in Chechnya, and we've now seen the caning of some gay men in Banda Aceh in Indonesia. Does the UN have any comment on these issues?
I think the Secretary General has seen recent developments, and he's deeply concerned about the recent spate of cases of gay men or men who were just perceived as being gay, being harassed, arrested, prosecuted, and punished, in some cases even allegedly tortured and killed on the grounds of their alleged sexual orientation. It's essential that fundamental human rights principle of non-discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation be safeguarded and fully respected. Everyone is entitled to their human rights and protection from violence and discrimination, irrespective of whom they may love. Yep.
Thank you. The High Rep for Disarmament during the Security Council meeting this morning mentioned a planned trip to Khan Sheikhoun by the OPCW fact-finding mission. Also said the UN might assist in some way. Can you elaborate on how the UN may assist, and do you know of a timetable for this trip?
I don't know of a timetable. That's something should be asked of the OPCW. Obviously, if they need to go anywhere and we're able to support them logistically, we would. Mr. Klein.
Yeah. I want to ask a follow-up on the Indonesia question. I was going to ask you about that specifically. Michelle already asked you. But more broadly, there appears to be, let's say, a conflict or clash between Sharia law and what Muslim-majority countries, including Indonesia, presumably, which has been called a moderate Muslim country, in terms of under Sharia law, the illegality or impermissibility of homosexuality versus the Secretary General's declaration and others' declaration that it's a fundamental human right for the protection against discrimination for people based on sexual orientation. You have a sort of a clash between two rights, if you will, free exercise of religion and sovereignty of Muslim-majority countries in applying their version of Sharia law, which prohibits homosexuality, versus the principle, universal human rights principle, in quotes, of non-discrimination based on sexual orientation. So how does the Secretary General reconcile the two?
I'm not sure. Look, first of all, I'm not an expert on Sharia law, and I'm not an expert on law in general. But I think if you look at the incidence of homophobia across the world in the past 1, 2, 3, 4 years, or discrimination against people for their sexual orientation or perceived sexual orientation, We've seen it happen in Christian countries, in Catholic countries. It seems to be something that that spans the world. Obviously, we attach great importance to the rights to human rights and for people's dignity and rights to be respected. But I think we have seen attacks on gay men and women in many countries. We've seen them in this city even. So I think I'm not qualified to talk about Sharia law or other kinds of religious laws. I just see that this is an issue of discrimination that seems to unfortunately span the world and a lot of cultures.
Well, I think the difference is that in many Muslim majority countries, the prohibition of homosexuality is enshrined in the constitution or domestic law of those countries, based on Sharia law, their understanding of Sharia law,
I think
versus what you correctly say are individual acts of harassment against gays all over the world, but there are laws protecting.
We stand against laws that discriminate against people, and I think you will see also there are laws on the prohibition of homosexuality, not just in Muslim countries, but in all sorts, all countries that have official and non-official religions. But I think it's a problem that spans the world.
Could you name some of those countries?
I will go on my Wikipedia and I will look with you afterwards.
Thank you.
Benny.
So President Trump, the U.S. president, was in Jerusalem and Bethlehem in the last couple of days, and there was a lot of confusion on the State Department website as to whether his visit to the Western Wall was in Israel or where was it. Does the UN have a position as to where the Western Wall is?
I think it's in Jerusalem.
Where is Jerusalem? What country is Jerusalem in?
I think the status of Jerusalem is one of the final status issues that will need to be negotiated.
Okay, one follow-up, please.
Yeah.
So in his speech today, Trump declined to mention the word two-state solution or talk about Palestinian state. As a co-member of the quartet, does the UN have any change of position as to that?
I think I wasn't planning on commenting on what he said, and I'm not going to comment on what he didn't say. But it's clear what the UN's position is. Yes, sir.
Yesterday, you talked about the combination of Google and UNHCR creating this website searching for Syria. So I took a look at it, and I was surprised that it did not have either a Russian or a Chinese section. It did have German, which is unusual, I think, for a UN site. So my question is there a mandate on UN organizations to have the 5 basic languages? Or are we seeing a step back from multilingualism because there are things like Google that is Google Translator on it?
I think you're overreading the situation, if I may say so. My understanding is that they're planning different languages, including one in Arabic, as they go along. But you can contact my colleagues at UNHCR for more information. But I would not say there's a rollback from multilingualism.
So there is a mandate on all UN sites.
There is a mandate for
5 languages.
I can speak for the Secretariat. All our official sites are expected to be in the 6 official languages. Masuji and then Mr. Abadi, who's been very patient.
Thank you so much, Stéphane. I just wanted to find out about this detention of children in Israel. It's continued detention of children, Palestinian children in particular. And I've been raising this issue earlier. Does the United Nations have the exact figure of the children under detention by the Israeli Authority? And has it had any conversation with the Israeli authorities as to release them?
I don't have those. I don't know if we have those figures. I don't have them with me. The issue of administrative detention of people, whether they be minors or adults, is one that we have raised repeatedly.
So isn't it against the law?
I think I've answered the question. Mr. Abadi.
Thank you, Stéphane. President Trump has relaunched or is trying to relaunch the Middle East peace process through his visits and discussions in Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the West Bank. What is the position at this stage of the quartet?
The quartet remains as it is. As soon as there's another meeting, we'll flag it to you. But I have no updates from the last update we may have given you on the quartet. Nizar, I have an answer for you. Sorry,
okay.
I have an answer for you. That we note with concern that a protester at a sit-in in Diraz in Bahrain was reportedly killed by security forces. We urge the authorities to investigate the killing and ensure that any use of force by security forces adheres to the relevant international standards. Supporters of Sheikh Qasim demonstrating near his house and security forces should exercise restraint.
How about the attack on civilians who are protesting peacefully or those who are picketing for many months? In similar circumstances, the United Nations would have taken an adamant position on that.
I think we always stand for the right to people to demonstrate peacefully.
I have another question regarding the cholera in Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
Does the United Nations view the blockade as contributor to the cholera in Yemen?
The ongoing conflict is the major contributor to the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Yemen. I will leave it at that. Matthew.
Well, I guess also in Yemen, then I want to ask you a couple other things. But on Yemen, there are these reports of the guards of envoy Ismail ul-Sheikh Ahmed opening fire in the air. It's unclear if who the guards were they UNDSS or not, and whether he was attacked by bottles and eggs, as one account puts it, or a more serious attack on his convoy.
Yesterday he was attacked by demonstrators. My understanding is that there were eggs and other things thrown at him, and a number of shots were also fired at the vehicle. He is continuing his engagements with the General People's Congress in Sana'a as earlier planned, as well as Ansarallah. Obviously, the security and safety of UN personnel is the responsibility of the local authorities, and it's their responsibility to investigate it. And we reiterate our call on all the parties to engage constructively in the negotiations over cessation of hostilities and resumption of the peace talks.
But did those protecting him also fire? And if so, who were they? Were they UN personnel or were they Haiti personnel?
My understanding is that they were local security personnel.
A private company?
They were local security personnel working for the authorities in
and
place.
I wanted to ask on Burundi. I'd asked you before whether Mr. Kafando had started yet, and at least me, I didn't understand the answer. Has he started? Is it true that he'll be coming to New York next week? And does the Secretariat or DPA intend to comply with the timeline and file a written report with the Security Council about Burundi in June?
As a matter of policy, we do our best to follow the instructions and mandate given to us by the Security Council. It is my understanding that he will be here next week to meet with officials in DPA, and so he'll be here next week.
And can you ask DPA whether they've agreed not to file a written report?
I think that was my first answer. Yes, Evelyn.
In Mali, do we know the nationality of the dead peacekeepers?
My understanding is that there were Chadians operating in that
Chadians.
in that area, but we're waiting for the full confirmation. Nizar.
Yeah, with Saudi Arabia saying that they want to take the war to Iran itself, and then the United States is providing a big deal of $450 billion worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia. How does the United Nations stand seeing such escalation and in armament in the region and threats as well?
I think for us, the focus continues to remain on engagement in the political talks. So we call all parties to engage in political talks and to halt the violence. That has been and will remain our position.
So does the provision of weapons at that massive scale help the peace?
I think I've answered the question. Yes, Benny.
Speaking of SRSGs, Cobbler is still in Libya and going to be for a while. Is there any active search for a replacement?
As soon as we have something to announce, we shall. Matthew and then Mr. Abadi.
Sure. I asked you yesterday about Kung-Wak Kang.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, she had said to the South Korean press that she had to wind up a few things in New York before going for, I guess, a confirmation hearing. What's her status with the UN? Did she resign? Is
she handed in her resignation letter today to the Secretary General, effective tomorrow. So she will. My understanding, she'll travel to Korea very soon. But as of tomorrow, she will no longer be employed by the United Nations. So when she arrives in Korea, she will be free and clear of her contractual obligations or of any contractual link to the United Nations.
And will that post is there recruitment to begin for that post?
I think
to find
we're still getting over the shock of her leaving, and then I'm sure
there's no agreement to return.
She's handed in her resignation. It's not a resignation with an asterisk says I can come back. So she's cut the ties with the mothership, unfortunately. Mr. Abadi.
Thank you, Stéphane. Did the Secretary General at any time discuss the Middle East peace process with President Trump before his departure to the region?
There's the last meeting, and the only meeting between the Secretary General and the President was in Washington. I can't remember earlier this month or late last month, in which it was a brief conversation in which they agreed to have to meet again soon. So when they do, we shall announce it.
Just a quick follow-up to that.
Yes, sir.
Was there any conversation on the subject of the Middle East between the Secretary General and Secretary of State Tillerson or any other member of President Trump's cabinet?
We've had
within the last week or so in the context of President's trip.
Not within the last week. I will get our following guests.